Are you an empath? I have good news for you then. Listen up and never doubt yourself again. What I am about to tell you today will change everything what you knew about yourself and other people. Did you know that Carl Jung, one of the most brilliant psychological thinkers in history, discovered something deeply unsettling about highly empathetic people? And most people still completely misunderstand it. Society loves to paint empaths as soft, forgiving, emotionally weak people who will tolerate endless disrespect just to keep the peace. But what if the exact opposite is true? What if the person who feels the deepest is also the person who sees the most? Do you know someone like that? Or maybe, are you that person? Carl Jung described a type of person who doesn't just feel emotions deeply, they study people quietly, constantly, almost unconsciously. They notice the tiny shifts in your tone, the forced smile that doesn't reach your eyes, the promise you casually broke and hoped nobody remembered. They notice how you behave when there's nothing to gain. They notice the coldness hidden underneath fake kindness. And here's the dangerous part. They usually say nothing. That's why people underestimate them. Manipulators think they're getting away with it. Narcissists think the empath is too emotional to see clearly. Liars think they've sold the story successfully. But the empath already felt something was wrong long before the facts appeared. Have you ever had that feeling around someone where your intuition started screaming before your mind could explain why? Were you ever told that you are paranoid? Don't listen to them. That's not paranoia. That's your pattern recognition built through pain, survival, and emotional intelligence. A true empath does not judge quickly. In fact, you give too many chances. You desperately want to believe the best in people. You explain away red flags. You rationalize disrespect. You tell yourself, maybe the person is stressed, wounded, overwhelmed, misunderstood. But every inconsistency gets stored somewhere deep inside you. Every manipulation, every moment of emotional instability, every cruel reaction during vulnerable moments, every time someone made them feel emotionally unsafe. And eventually, something shifts inside empaths permanently. Not because of one fight, not because of one mistake, but because of repeated patterns, repeated dishonesty, repeated emotional chaos, repeated disrespect disguised as just being honest. And suddenly, the empath realizes something heartbreaking. This person does not protect my peace. They destroy it. Can you imagine how painful that realization is when you once admired someone deeply? Because admiration dies slowly. It dies every time someone chooses ego over accountability. It dies every time love becomes emotional unpredictability. It dies when the person you once saw as safe becomes the source of anxiety itself. And once an empath emotionally sees someone clearly, they cannot unsee it. That's the part people never recover from. Because empaths don't usually scream when they're done. They don't always seek revenge. They don't always announce their departure dramatically. They simply detach, quietly, completely. One day, the warmth disappears from their eyes, the emotional investment shuts off, and the person who thought they had endless chances suddenly realizes the door has closed forever. And what's terrifying is that by the time this happens, the empath already grieved the relationship silently while still standing inside it. Have you ever watched someone emotionally leave before they physically left? Have you ever felt yourself slowly stop fighting for someone because deep down, you no longer felt safe with them? That's what people don't understand about empaths. They can survive enormous pain, but they cannot survive consistent emotional betrayal. And once respect collapses, once the illusion breaks, once the mask slips too many times, There are some things the human heart simply cannot unsee. Now here's the part most people never see coming. The final breaking point for a deeply empathetic person is almost never one betrayal, one argument, or one bad day. It's something much more psychologically destructive than that. It's the slow, repeated destruction of trust. It's when someone repeatedly makes the empath question their own reality. Have you ever been in a relationship where you started doubting your own instincts, where you felt something was wrong deep in your gut, but the other person kept convincing you that you were too emotional, too sensitive, overthinking, or crazy? That's not normal conflict. That's psychological erosion. And over time, it changes people at the deepest level. The manipulator lies even when the empath already knows the truth. They deny obvious patterns. They twist conversations. They minimize feelings. They subtly punish the empath for asking questions. They weaponize kindness against the very person offering it. And the empath, because they genuinely care, keeps trying to understand instead of immediately walking away. They give more patience, more compassion, more emotional labor. They tell themselves, maybe this person is wounded, maybe they had a difficult past, maybe if I love them harder, communicate better, stay calmer, things will finally change. Do you recognize that cycle? Because this is where the most dangerous misunderstanding happens. The manipulative person starts believing the empath will never leave. They confuse patience with weakness. They mistake silence for blindness. They assume loyalty means permanent access. But emotionally intelligent people are not blind. They are observing everything quietly, while fighting an internal war nobody else can see. And that internal war becomes exhausting. The empath notices that the stories never fully line up. The apologies repeat, but the behavior never changes. The promises sound beautiful, but the actions stay inconsistent. The boundaries keep getting crossed. The emotional chaos keeps returning. And every time the empath brings it up, somehow they end up being blamed for noticing it. Slowly, the empath begins questioning themselves instead of questioning the behavior. Maybe I'm expecting too much. Maybe I'm too suspicious. Maybe I'm the difficult one. And this is exactly how emotional manipulation works. Because the moment someone disconnects you from your intuition, they gain control over your reality. But eventually, something inside the empath starts waking up. Not rage, not revenge, something colder, clearer, stronger. It's the moment they stop prioritizing the other person's feelings over their own mental peace. Psychologically, this is a massive shift. Because many deeply empathetic people spend years suppressing their anger, suppressing their boundaries, suppressing the instinct to protect themselves. They would rather hurt themselves than hurt someone they love. But repeated betrayal changes that. Repeated emotional instability changes that. There comes a moment when survival becomes stronger than attachment. And when that moment arrives, the empath suddenly sees the relationship with terrifying clarity. They realize staying requires self-betrayal. Staying requires ignoring reality. Staying requires silencing their intuition over and over until they no longer recognize themselves. And eventually, the emotional cost becomes unbearable. This realization does not happen overnight. In fact, empaths usually fight against it with everything they have. They keep trying to see the good. They keep giving more understanding. They keep making excuses for behavior that continues hurting them. They minimize their own pain just to preserve the connection. They gaslight themselves to protect the image of the person they once loved. But eventually, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The truth becomes too obvious. And suddenly the pain of staying becomes greater than the fear of leaving. That is the real transformation. That is when a highly empathetic person becomes emotionally untouchable. Not because they became cruel, not because they stopped loving, but because they finally chose themselves over a relationship that was slowly destroying their sense of reality. And once that clarity fully arrives, something changes permanently. The empath stops trying to save the connection, stops trying to convince, stops trying to explain, stops trying to fix someone who keeps choosing dysfunction over honesty. And that silence, that emotional withdrawal, that's usually the moment the other person realizes they pushed too far. But by then, it's already over emotionally. Have you ever reached a point where you suddenly felt completely done with someone you once would have done anything for? That moment where your heart becomes calm instead of emotional. That's not weakness leaving, that's self-respect finally arriving. At some point, the empath finally accepts the most painful truth of all. The person they kept hoping for does not actually exist. The version they were fighting for, the leaving in, protecting, waiting for, was potential, not reality. And that realization changes everything. Because once an empath understands that someone is emotionally unsafe, they cannot force themselves to feel secure again. Have you ever loved someone deeply, but slowly realized your nervous system no longer relaxed around them? That your body felt tension before your mind admitted the truth? That's the moment everything begins shutting down internally. And this is where people completely misunderstand the empathic personality. They expect explosions. They expect dramatic exits, angry texts, public revenge, emotional chaos. But real emotional detachment is much quieter than that. The empath does not scream. They do not beg. They do not try to destroy the other person. They simply go silent. The warmth disappears from their voice. The emotional presence fades. The energy that once felt nurturing suddenly becomes distant, almost unreachable. And the other person feels it immediately. Suddenly the attention is gone. The effort is gone. The emotional softness is gone. It feels like talking to someone who is physically there, but emotionally somewhere else entirely. Have you ever experienced that? When someone still answers you politely, still communicates calmly, but something essential has disappeared from behind their eyes. That's not a mood. That's not temporary frustration. That is emotional shutdown. The empath has already made a decision deep inside themselves that cannot easily be reversed. They no longer feel emotionally safe with that person. They no longer trust them with their inner world. And once an empath loses emotional trust completely, something irreversible happens psychologically. They stop attaching meaning to the connection. The illusion breaks. The excuses stop working. The emotional fog lifts. And suddenly they see the relationship exactly as it is, instead of how they hoped it could become. This is why there is usually no way back after the door slam. Not because the empath hates the person, not because they stopped caring overnight, but because they finally see the full pattern clearly. They see the manipulation hidden inside the charm. They see the selfishness hidden inside the apologies. They see the repeated cycles, the emotional games, the inconsistency, the dishonesty, the subtle cruelty that kept getting dismissed and rationalized for far too long. And once someone truly sees another person without illusion, they cannot unsee it. That's the terrifying part. Because people often think empaths are emotional decision makers, but in reality, when they finally detach, it's usually after months or even years of observation, internal conflict, and emotional pain. By the time they emotionally leave, they have already replayed every memory in their mind 1,000 times. They already tried to save the relationship silently. They already grieved the loss while still standing inside the connection. So when they finally become cold, it's not impulsive. It's the end result of emotional exhaustion. And the person on the other side usually realizes it too late. They suddenly panic because the empath is no longer reacting emotionally. No more chasing, no more pleading, no more trying to fix things, just calm distance. And strangely, that calmness is what hurts the most. Because for the first time, the manipulator realizes they no longer have emotional access to the person they once took for granted. Have you ever reached a point where someone who once meant everything to you suddenly felt emotionally unreachable inside your heart? That's not cruelty. That's what happens when self-protection finally becomes stronger than attachment. One of the deepest psychological truths is this: once you truly see someone clearly, you can never fully go back to who you were before. Once you watch someone lie to your face while looking directly into your eyes, something changes inside you, permanently. Once you feel someone manipulating your emotions while pretending to care about you, your nervous system remembers it, even if your heart tries to forgive it. Have you ever had that feeling where your intuition noticed the truth long before your mind wanted to accept it? That quiet inner voice telling you something was off, even while you were still trying to love the person anyway. That intuition is not weakness. For deeply empathetic people, intuition is survival. It is their internal radar, their emotional compass, their ability to sense danger beneath appearances. And this is exactly why repeated gaslighting becomes so psychologically destructive. Because gaslighting is not just lying. It's an attempt to disconnect someone from their own perception of reality. It's saying, don't trust what you saw. Don't trust what you felt. Don't trust your instincts. Trust my version instead. Do you understand how damaging that becomes over time? The empath starts questioning their own eyes, their own emotions, their own memories. They begin abandoning themselves in order to preserve the relationship. And eventually, something inside them reaches a breaking point. Because trust is not just honesty. Real trust is the feeling that you can exist as your authentic self without constantly being told your reality is wrong. It's the ability to feel emotionally safe while being fully awake, fully aware, fully conscious of what you're experiencing. The moment someone repeatedly attacks an empath's intuition, they are attacking the very core of that person's identity. They are asking the empath to become blind in order to keep the connection alive. And eventually, the empath realizes something devastating but freeing at the same time. If I stay here, I will lose myself. And that is the moment everything changes. Because a healthy empath will eventually choose loneliness over self-betrayal. They will choose grief over psychological confusion. They will choose silence over manipulation. They will choose to lose the relationship rather than lose their own mind trying to maintain it. And that is the real cost of betrayal that most people never understand. The empath does not leave because they stopped loving you. They leave because loving you started requiring them to stop loving themselves. This is the part people mistake for revenge, but it's not revenge at all. It's survival. The empath finally realizes that staying emotionally connected to someone like this requires disconnecting from themselves, and eventually that equation becomes impossible to live with. They try to make it work. God, they tried. They bent themselves into emotional shapes that were never natural just to keep the peace. They dimmed their intuition so you wouldn't feel uncomfortable. They swallowed their truth to avoid conflict. They kept abandoning their own emotional needs just to preserve the connection. Have you ever done that? Have you ever slowly silenced parts of yourself just to avoid losing someone? That's not love anymore. That's self-erasure. And one day, the empath wakes up and understands something devastating. The relationship was never truly being carried by two people. It survived on their emotional labor, their patience, their hope, their ability to forgive, their willingness to keep understanding behavior that should never have required that much understanding in the first place. The connection was being held together by one person trying to heal what the other person kept breaking. And once the empath sees that clearly, they stop pretending. Psychologically, this transformation happens in stages. First, they feel that something is wrong long before they can explain it logically. Then the internal conflict begins. They question themselves constantly. Am I imagining this? Am I overreacting? Why do I feel anxious around someone who says they love me? Do you understand how emotionally exhausting that becomes? Living in a constant war between your intuition and someone else's version of reality. Then comes the testing phase. The empath gives opportunities for honesty, opportunities for accountability, opportunities for emotional safety. They communicate boundaries. They explain their pain calmly. They hope the other person will finally choose truth over ego. But most manipulative people fail this stage completely. Instead of becoming more honest, they become more defensive. Instead of listening, they accuse the empath of being too sensitive, dramatic, or hard to please. And that reaction becomes the final confirmation. Because emotionally healthy people care when they hurt you. Manipulative people care when you stop tolerating it. And suddenly, the empath understands everything they were trying not to see. This is when the emotional shift becomes permanent. The endlessly forgiving part of them becomes neutral. The overgiving part becomes reserved. The part that kept fighting for the relationship simply lets go. Not out of hatred, out of clarity. And clarity is terrifying, because once someone sees reality clearly, fantasy loses its power completely. The empath finally learns that sensitivity was never supposed to be used only as a bridge to others. It was also supposed to be a shield for themselves. They realize not everyone deserves unlimited access to their heart. Not everyone deserves endless understanding while offering emotional instability in return. And this is where boundaries stop feeling mean and start feeling necessary for survival. Because protecting yourself is not cruelty. Saying no is not abuse. Walking away from emotional chaos is not weakness. It's choosing reality over illusion. It's choosing peace over emotional addiction. It's choosing mental health over attachment to someone who keeps promising change without ever truly changing. And maybe the hardest truth of all is this. Sometimes the empath does still love the person when they leave, but they finally love themselves enough to stop dying slowly inside the relationship. Let me explain why some betrayals become impossible for you to forgive. Forgiveness requires hope. It requires you to believe the damage can actually be repaired, that honesty is still possible, that trust can somehow grow back after being broken. But at some point, you stop operating on hope and start operating on clarity. You start analyzing the pattern instead of the promises. You stop listening to words and start measuring consistency. And suddenly, the math no longer works. Because trust cannot survive in a relationship where your reality is constantly being manipulated. Have you ever realized that the deepest damage was never the lie itself, but the fact that someone looked directly into your eyes and tried to make you doubt your own instincts? That's the part that changes you forever. Because gaslighting is not simple dishonesty. It's the intentional distortion of reality to protect someone's ego, image, or control over you. And once someone shows you they are willing to twist your perception in order to avoid accountability, something inside you finally understands a terrifying truth. If they did it once without remorse, they will do it again. That realization doesn't make you bitter, it makes you realistic. People think you are cold because you stop giving endless chances. They think your compassion means permanent access to your heart. They think guilt will always pull you back. But guilt only works while you still emotionally see them the same way. And this is the shift that changes everything. Once the emotional door closes, they stop being the person you were desperately trying to save. They become a lesson, a boundary, a reminder of what you will never allow again. Do you understand how powerful that transformation is psychologically? Because now the dynamic completely changes. You are no longer emotionally trapped, trying to prove your worth, trying to earn honesty, trying to fix someone who keeps hurting you. Now you are simply observing reality clearly. And the truth is brutal. Indifference is not hatred. Hatred still requires emotional attachment. Real detachment is emptiness, silence, the absence of emotional energy where love once existed. And this is the part that shocks people the most. Because after the emotional door closes, they almost always come back. They reach out weeks later, months later, sometimes years later. Suddenly they apologize. Suddenly they understand. Suddenly they promise growth, healing, change, accountability. Have you ever noticed how people often realize your value only after losing access to you emotionally? But by that point, something inside you has already changed permanently. You don't react emotionally anymore. Maybe you respond politely. Maybe you say very little. Maybe your tone sounds calm but distant. And the other person feels it immediately. They feel the warmth is gone. The emotional pull is gone. The connection they once controlled no longer exists. And it confuses them deeply because they remember the version of you who cared endlessly, fought endlessly, forgave endlessly. What happened to you? They ask. But the truth is simple and devastating. You stopped lying to yourself. You stopped pretending they were someone they repeatedly proved they were not. You stopped hoping potential would magically become reality. You accepted what your intuition had been trying to tell you for a very long time. This person is emotionally unsafe for you. And once you fully accept that truth internally, manipulation loses its power completely. That's when the real tests begin. They will try guilt. They will call you cold. They will accuse you of being unforgiving, dramatic, cruel, unfair. They will remind you of the good memories. They will promise a better future. They will try to use your own empathy against you again because that strategy worked before. But now something is different inside you. You finally understand that protecting your peace is not selfish. Protecting your reality is not cruelty. Walking away from emotional confusion is not weakness. And for the first time in a very long time, you stop prioritizing their feelings over your own mental and emotional survival. That is not revenge. That is self-respect finally waking up. Eventually, you understand something that changes your entire life. Your intuition is sacred. It is not paranoia. It is not being too emotional. It is the part of you that kept trying to protect you long before your mind was ready to accept the truth. And once you realize that, you stop treating people who constantly gaslight you as misunderstood. You start seeing them as emotionally dangerous. That shift is powerful because now you value your peace more than the fantasy of connection. And honestly, that becomes the ultimate consequence for the person who lost you. Not your anger, not revenge, not dramatic closure. Indifference. The moment their words stop carrying emotional weight inside you, everything changes. Their presence no longer affects your nervous system. Their apologies no longer move your heart. Their manipulation no longer creates confusion. It's like they suddenly become emotionally irrelevant. And people underestimate how psychologically devastating that is, because most individuals can handle anger far better than they can handle emotional absence. Have you ever noticed that? When someone is angry, at least they still care. But when someone becomes emotionally neutral toward you, that's usually the real ending. This is where deep emotional growth actually happens. Real growth is not becoming endlessly soft and endlessly available. Real growth is learning how to balance compassion with self-protection, empathy with boundaries, love with discernment. You finally realize boundaries are not punishment, they are filters. They protect what is sacred inside you. They determine who gets access to your energy, your vulnerability, your trust, your emotional world. And once you learn that lesson deeply, you stop giving unlimited access to people who repeatedly damage your peace. That doesn't make you cruel. It makes you wise. It makes you selective. It makes you emotionally powerful, because now you know your own value, and you know the cost of betraying yourself just to keep someone else comfortable. And once you fully understand that cost, you never want to pay it again. The people who lose access to you often become confused by this transformation. They say things like, "I thought you were the type of person who forgives." But this is where most people completely misunderstand forgiveness. Let me explain something that changed my perspective forever. One time, someone told me, "You need to forgive." And I realized people confuse forgiveness with reconnection all the time. They are not the same thing. Forgiveness means releasing resentment. It means no longer wanting revenge. It means letting go of the emotional poison so it stops living inside your body and mind. But forgiveness does not require you to reopen the door to someone who repeatedly harmed your reality. Do you understand the difference? You can genuinely forgive someone and still never allow them close to you again. You can wish them healing from a distance while fully accepting that they are no longer safe for your life. Forgiveness is internal. Reconnection is relational. One does not automatically require the other. And this is the final stage of emotional detachment. You stop carrying the person emotionally. You stop trying to save them, fix them, understand them, decode them, wait for them, hope for them. You release the emotional burden completely. But you also release the illusion that one day they will magically become trustworthy. That illusion dies. And once it dies, the door closes quietly, permanently, completely. Not because you hate them, but because you finally love yourself enough to stop reopening wounds that never truly healed. Door closed, locks changed, keys lost. Period. So let's summarize all of this, because maybe your whole life people have been telling you the same thing over and over again. Adjust more, be more understanding, forgive faster, stop being so sensitive, move on already. But let me tell you something that nobody teaches deeply empathetic people enough. You do not owe anyone access to you at the cost of losing yourself. You are not required to betray your own intuition just to make other people comfortable. You are not obligated to stay connected to people who repeatedly disconnect you from your reality. Your intuition is not a flaw. It is not weakness. It is a divine internal guidance system, and the more you silence it, the further you drift away from yourself. Do you understand how many people spend years abandoning their own truth just to maintain relationships that were never emotionally safe to begin with? And then they wonder why they feel exhausted, anxious, emotionally disconnected, or lost. Your healing begins the moment you stop asking, "How do I keep this person?" and start asking, "Why am I abandoning myself to keep them?" That question changes everything. Because true integrity is not about being endlessly available, endlessly forgiving, endlessly understanding while someone keeps violating your peace. True integrity is learning how to live in alignment with your values, your intuition, your emotional reality, and your self-respect. It is learning to trust yourself again after years of questioning your own mind for the comfort of others. And yes, forgiveness can exist, compassion can exist, love can still exist. But none of those things should ever require self-betrayal. The strongest thing you will ever do is stop shrinking yourself to fit inside unhealthy dynamics. The strongest thing you will ever do is trust what your soul has been trying to tell you all along. So if you recognize these patterns inside yourself, if you've experienced that silent emotional shutdown after too much manipulation, too much confusion, too much emotional instability, I want you to write in the comments, "I confirm, I accept." Not for me, for yourself. Because awareness is the beginning of freedom. This was, always yours, Katara Lilith. Thank you for being part of the Soft Power Society. And if this video touched something deep inside you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. I'm always here for you.